My dad didn't say a single word during our grueling 9-hour drive. The only sound in the car was the tense, calculated whispering between him and my stepmother. I thought they were just sending me away to a strict boarding school to get rid of me, but when the car finally pulled up to a secluded log cabin deep in the wilderness, my heart completely sank. A towering, cold-eyed stranger was waiting on the porch. My dad didn't even look at me or hug me goodbye. Instead, he pulled out a thick envelope of cash and handed it over to the man. The stranger smirked, counting the bills like I was a business transaction. But as I reached for my bag, his eyes locked onto the vintage silver locket around my neck. He instantly froze, the cash slipping from his hands. He looked at me, terrified, and whispered, "What's your mother's name?" My name is Amelia, and at 17 years old, I had already learned that the people who are supposed to protect you can become your worst enemies. For as long as I could remember, my life had been a series of quiet miseries inside a home that didn't want me. My stepmother, a coldly elegant woman who treated my existence like a persistent stain on her perfect hardwood floors, ruled our house with absolute authority. My father, weak-willed and entirely hollowed out by her demands, never once stood up for me. But I never imagined how far their resentment would actually go until one rainy Tuesday morning. I was woken up at dawn by my stepmother throwing a single canvas suitcase onto my bed. "Pack your things," she commanded, her voice devoid of any human warmth. "All of them. We're leaving in 20 minutes. When I looked at my father for answers, he couldn't even meet my gaze, staring down at his shoes with a look of intense, crushing guilt. No one told me where we were going, or why I was being forced to empty my closet. Within minutes, I was shoved into the backseat of our sedan, starting a grueling 9-hour journey across 600 miles of changing terrain. The silence inside the car was suffocating, broken only by the low, calculated whispering between my father and stepmother in the front seats. Every time I tried to ask a question, my stepmother would snap at me to be quiet, while my father just gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. I assumed they were sending me to a strict boarding school to get rid of me forever. I had no idea that we were driving toward a dark trap, or that my life was about to be altered completely. The endless stretch of highway eventually dissolved into a rugged, unpaved dirt road that snaked deep into the dense, suffocating wilderness. As the car finally sputtered to a halt, my heart completely sank into my stomach. Nestled in a lonely clearing surrounded by towering pines stood a secluded log cabin, looking dark, isolated, and completely cut off from civilization. Waiting on the porch was a towering, broad-shouldered stranger named Silas, whose cold, unblinking eyes tracked our vehicle with the intensity of a predator. The heavy, metallic thud of the car doors echoing through the silent woods made the reality of my situation hit me all at once. My stepmother didn't even bother to step out onto the damp earth, staring out the window with a look of smug satisfaction. My father gripped my arm, forcing me up the creaking wooden steps of the porch toward the intimidating man. There were no emotional farewells, no explanations, and absolutely no comforting words. My father didn't even look me in the eye or hug me goodbye. Instead, his trembling hands reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope stuffed with crisp stacks of cash. With a submissive nod, my father handed the entire fortune over to the stranger. Silas smirked, a chilling, humorless expression, and began counting the thick bundles of bills right in front of me, treating my life like a casual, under-the-table business transaction. In that devastating second, the terrifying truth shattered my mind. My parents hadn't driven 600 miles to enroll me in some strict, distant boarding school. They were actively abandoning me, trading my freedom and handing me over to a complete stranger under a sinister, hidden arrangement. Silas continued flicking through the bills, his cold calculation radiating through the damp mountain air. I stood frozen on the porch, my fingers trembling as I instinctively reached down to clutch the only item of comfort I had left, the vintage silver locket hanging around my neck. It was a beautiful, intricate piece of jewelry, the sole heirloom left to me by my biological mother, who had supposedly passed away from a sudden illness when I was just an infant. As my hand brushed against the metal, the slight reflection of the afternoon sun caught Silas's eye. His thumb stopped mid-count on $100 bill. His gaze snapped down to my chest, and his eyes locked onto the locket with a sudden, piercing intensity. In an instant, his tough, predatory exterior completely shattered. The color drained from his face, and his hands began to shake so violently that the thick envelope slipped from his grip, scattering the cash across the wooden floorboards of the porch. He took a slow, terrified step toward me, looking at my face as if he were seeing a ghost, and whispered in a raw, trembling voice, "What's your mother's name?" Before I tell you what my mother's real name was, and the dark secret it unlocked, comment below with the city you are watching from. Let's see how far Amelia's story has reached. I swallowed the lump in my throat and cleared my voice, uttering the name I had repeated in my prayers for 17 years. Marianne. The moment the name left my lips, Silas's eyes widened in absolute shock before turning back toward my father with a look of pure, unadulterated rage. The heavy silence on the porch shattered as Silas stepped between me and my father. He didn't look like a threat anymore. He looked like a man who had finally found what he was looking for after an entire lifetime of searching. Turning his fierce gaze to me, his voice softened completely. He revealed that he wasn't a criminal or a stranger at all. Silas was the biological brother of my real mother, Marianne. He was my uncle. As my father shrank back in terror, Silas exposed the massive, twisted lie that had formed the foundation of my entire existence. My biological mother hadn't died of a sudden illness when I was an infant, nor had she ever abandoned me. The truth was far more sinister. Years ago, my father and stepmother had physically abducted me and fled across the country to conceal a massive, multi-million-dollar inheritance left exclusively in my name by my mother's wealthy family. Silas had spent over a decade tracking our movements, slowly closing the distance. My father hadn't brought me to this remote cabin to abandon me out of spite. He was paying Silas extortion money because Silas had finally cornered him. However, my parents had deviously lied to Silas over the phone, claiming that I had tragically passed away years ago, and that the cash was a final legal settlement to make him go away. They had only brought me along on this 600-mile journey to drop me off at a random, distant location afterward, so I would never discover my true identity or claim my wealth. But their entire web of deception collapsed the exact second my mother's locket caught the light. With the truth laid bare, the power dynamic on the creaking wooden porch completely flipped in a single heartbeat. Silas drew himself up to his full height, stepping forward to stand protectively and defiantly in front of me, shielding me from the two people who had stolen my entire life. My father and stepmother stared at him, the absolute paralyzing terror evident on their faces as they realized their elaborate multi-million-dollar web of fraud had completely collapsed in a single second. My stepmother's smug satisfaction instantly vanished, replaced by a frantic, pale desperation as she clutched her designer purse like a useless shield. Silas reached into his heavy leather jacket and pulled out a bound legal folder, slamming it onto the wooden railing. He revealed that he wasn't just acting on emotion. He had extensive legal backing, private investigation records, and certified documentation from the authorities. Looking directly at my trembling father, Silas delivered a cold, unyielding ultimatum. They had exactly 60 seconds to get back into their sedan and drive away forever. If they chose to argue, or if they ever tried to contact me again, Silas would immediately call the federal authorities waiting on standby. He promised to hand over the overwhelming evidence of grand larceny, identity theft, and child endangerment that would ensure they both spent the rest of their natural lives behind bars. My stepmother looked at the road, then at the scattered cash, realizing they had lost absolutely everything. My weak-willed father didn't even attempt to negotiate or plead for mercy. They simply turned around, descending the steps in absolute defeat, knowing that their long game of greed had finally reached its bitter, shameful end. The desperate roar of the sedan's engine shattered the silence of the woods as my father and stepmother sped down the dirt road, kicking up a massive cloud of dust that swallowed their retreat. They fled into the distance, leaving behind the scattered envelope of cash, my solitary canvas suitcase, and me. I watched the taillights vanish behind the thick tree line, and for the first time in 17 years, a colossal, overwhelming wave of relief washed over my chest. The suffocating weight of living in a home where I was despised instantly evaporated into the crisp mountain air. I was finally completely safe. As the dust settled, the remote cabin stopped looking like an eerie, isolated prison and transformed into a peaceful sanctuary. Silas looked down at me, the intimidating sternness completely gone from his eyes, replaced by a warm, familial kindness. He gently guided me inside the cabin, where a crackling fireplace cast a cozy, welcoming glow across the room. He walked over to an old wooden desk and brought over a dusty leather album filled with vintage family photographs. For hours we sat together as he pointed out pictures of my biological mother, Mary Ann. Seeing her smile, realizing how much I looked like her, and listening to stories about her love for me validated an identity I had been forced to suppress for a lifetime. In that quiet clearing, surrounded by the remnants of my true heritage, I realized I hadn't been abandoned at all. I had finally been found by my real family. Over the next few months, my life transformed in ways I never could have imagined back when I was trapped in that cold, silent house. With Uncle Silas and a team of dedicated lawyers by my side, we successfully reclaimed the multi-million-dollar inheritance my biological mother had left for me. I legally cut ties with my father and stepmother permanently, ensuring they would never see a single dime of the wealth they had spent a decade trying to steal. They had traded their integrity for greed, and in the end, they were left with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of their own choices. Today, I live a peaceful, secure life, surrounded by people who love me for who I am, not what I own. What would you have done if you found out your entire life was a lie built on greed? Let me know in the comments below. I'm incredibly eager to read your perspectives in the comments section below. In the meantime, make sure to check out the 2 gripping mysteries popping up on your screen right now. They are massive crowd favorites and feature twists you will never see coming. Thank you for sharing your time with me today.